Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Michele Robinson. I'm the Deputy Director with the California Technology Agency, Office of Information Security. And today with me, our distinguished guests are Becky Stilling, who is the Chief Information Officer and Deputy Director with the Department of Child Support Services. Terry Allen, who is the Information Systems Manager for the City of Oakland, and Jeana Pieralde, the Chief Security Officer and Business Services Manager for the City and County of San Francisco. And they've agreed to be with us this afternoon to share some of the lessons learned from some fairly significant incidents that they've encountered in their tenure. And we're very thankful to them for being here and their willingness to share with us, especially in this open forum, so that perhaps we could learn from their experiences. So thank you all for being with us today. We greatly appreciate it. As far as our panel structure this afternoon, we're going to, each panelist is going to kind of share with you a little overview or synopsis of the incident or incidents that they've encountered recently of significance. And then we'll get into some questions, and we'll follow that at the end with some audience questions, time permitting, and gauging the appropriateness of those questions. So be kind, be kind. All right. So Becky, would you like to start us off with your experience?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm glad to be here today, although I will say that at the time Michele called me and asked me if I'd be willing to do this, I think I answered a little too quickly yes, because she shortly after that said, well, good, because nobody else in the state wants to do this panel. Yikes. But I do believe that when you go through something like the Department of Child Support did and the way we responded to it, there's a lot to be learned from it and then a lot to be proud of. And so in some respects, I'm kind of proud to share our experiences because I think in a lot of ways we handled things pretty well. The incident that happened with the Department of Child Support's data was, it occurred last March, I think at the end of March, and a lot of the work activity that in response to that took place over the month of April and a little beyond that. Department of Child Support is responsible for a child support enforcement system that has roughly 4 million case records. We have about 6,000 users statewide that interact with this system, and it has about 90 terabytes of data. It's a very large system, and it's pretty new. It went into effect in the end of 2008, December 2008. In last fall, we migrated from the IBM data center over to OTEC, and that was all planned. We had IBM and some other contractors who built our system. They turned over M&O responsibility to the Department of Child Support Services, to my organization, the Technology Services Division, and then we migrated the system from IBM's EBHC data center over to OTEC, as I said, last fall. Well, it was time to do a disaster recovery exercise in the new hosting center, and OTEC was responsible for performing disaster recovery exercises and providing disaster recovery services for our child support enforcement system. And we were in the beginning round of an exercise, and at that time, and I think even today, OTEC contracts with IBM and Boulder to do disaster recovery hosting as well as exercises. So we had planned this test, and OTEC created some backup tapes from our child support enforcement system, and they transmitted those through a couple of vendors on the way to the IBM Boulder data center. IBM performed the test and then returned the tapes, and lo and behold, in the course of tapes being transmitted back, when the folks at OTEC that were responsible for receiving those tapes back, in the receipt of them, they recognized that one of the boxes containing these tapes was missing, and in that was missing some tapes. So they took their due diligence, looked for the tapes, went back through the chain, couldn't find them. But pretty quickly you have to decide, it's one of the important aspects of managing information security incidents or breaches. You have to decide pretty quickly what's the situation here. I think OTEC did a good job of contacting our department, contacting the people that needed to be contacted, and so we were looking for these tapes. A couple of them were found, separated from the boxes, but one of the tapes was never found. And so that created the realization that that's what happened, caused us to have to deal with the incident of the missing tape. And these were, you know, mag tapes. They required specialized equipment to read them. The content on there, we knew what it was because we had had logged all that information, and we were able to discern that what was on that tape that was missing was some records from our child support enforcement system. It did include records that involved individuals' information. And as it turns out, that information were images of form sets or documents that were part of the child support case. In some cases, those documents we knew could contain Social Security, personal identifiable information. It also could include some medical or employment information, so some sensitive information. And we were able to track back through the presence of those documents in that data set that was part of the backup group of records, exactly who had cases and who had documents in that. And that allowed us to then identify which individuals may have been affected through the loss of control of this tape that had their records on it. That allowed us then to make the decision that it was possible for us to contact the individuals affected. But it was a large group. It was around 900,000 individuals that we had to send contact letters out to. We could have gone with the other approach of notifying affected people by putting it in the media. But in discussions with my executive management, my director, chief deputy, we thought it's going to be in the media anyway. It's a big deal. You gotta appreciate that. But we also wanted the individuals to know that we were communicating with them, and we wanted them to have the support necessary that that they deserve as to knowing what documents may have been subject to or was subject to our loss of control of that tape, and then what steps they should take to protect themselves. So we did make that decision to go ahead and communicate with the individuals. OTEC was working with the vendors to try to locate the missing tape. There was a lot of activity. Even today, there's still, months later, while the tape has not ever been found at this point, we think it's highly unlikely it ever will be, but nevertheless, there is still a watch for it in the event it shows up in a lost and found somewhere and then can get returned to OTEC. So that series of steps that we took to be able to communicate with the individuals and then notify all of the relevant parties that have to be notified according to the state's requirements was part of a very major project effort that I have to give a lot of credit to our information security officer at Department of Child Support Services, Judy Ramos, who happens to be sitting right down here. She put together a really good project plan to help us identify all the required steps to discuss and to plan amongst ourselves how we would handle all of this activity. And I think at the end of the day, we handled it reasonably well after it occurred. So I'll stop there because more information will come out about it throughout the questions we're going to answer.
Thank you, Becky. Excuse me. Mic on? Can you hear me? Thank you. Good afternoon. This is a timely event for us because as the rest of the world basically looked at the anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, the city of Oakland is getting prepared for the anniversary of Occupy Oakland. And Occupy Oakland for the city of Oakland was a dynamic change for us. Socially, Oakland is not new to protest. Protesting in Oakland makes Oakland Oakland. That's what people do. That's just one of the things. And so it makes it a very open community. I live there. I love Oakland. I wouldn't change it for anything. But Occupy Oakland, from the very beginning, looking back, was different than other protests. I have an office that looks directly over the plaza right downtown Oakland. And what I saw was different groups gathering together, which was very positive. There were criminal elements, social elements, anarchist elements cooperating, which was very different than in the past. And what we didn't know at that time, as we looked at all of this, was that online, there was another community doing the same thing, planning to attack Oakland. We had no clue of that. We didn't know that at that time, because previously any protest involved property, real property, social elements, but not government. And this was new, not attacking government IT resources. So this was new for us. So I remember going back to October of last year, and it started for me, I received a call in mid-October, multiple calls, law enforcement, local, state, and federal. Oakland's under attack. There are fractions out there claiming to have Oakland data. Your systems have been compromised. At first I thought, you gotta be kidding me. This has never happened to Oakland. Oakland? Who's targeting Oakland? Right? But at that point, I started to look at the resources, gathered the team together, and we started looking at what possibly could happen. So at that point, we got our IT resources together, we started looking at our servers, checking for any signs of activity. One of the reports was that Oakland's administrative accounts have been placed publicly on our internet for all of your IT systems. Scary thought. At that point, we began to, again, check our systems, make necessary changes. I went out, contacted those organizations that were reporting this information, worked with the multi-state information sharing and analytical center, give me information, work with the FBI, and determined that the information that was posted was not what it was claimed to be. That was positive. But a system had been compromised. And when I say compromised, basically what happened was there was an old application put out there by developers no longer with the city a long time ago, Access, if you will. Access database on a public-facing server, can you believe it? And so basically, that system, I think I had 10 accounts in there. Not system IT accounts, but just information. Someone had logged on, created some test accounts. That's what they published. But the propaganda began. That was just the beginning of it. Later on, anytime we brought down our systems to start to protect and deal with any future threats, it was reported in the media that we were the victim of denial of service attacks. So we found ourselves being able to proactively bring down the servers and the infrastructure to patch them now, to protect them, do this in a reactive mode. But the media was saying to us basically, hey, you know what, we think Oakland's been compromised. You guys are down because someone's brought you down. So we had to basically interface with the media and let them know that, hey, no, we're doing this proactively. We'll have the systems back up in 1 hour. Okay, that cut that chatter. Because obviously if you have a denial of service attack, you can't say when it's over. That's not your call. Right, so that stopped that issue. Down the road, we have additional attacks. Basically, all of the SQL injection attacks started to come, denial of the service attacks, but in the end, our resources stayed up. We did not have any downtime because of attacks. We had downtime because of reactive maintenance. Reactive maintenance, that was our issue. And so from that standpoint, I feel pleased in that sense. What made this very positive for us, which was surprising to me, was the support I got from our vendors. There's the large vendors and there's the small vendors. But I can honestly say, and I know this, I'm going to get a lot of sales calls after this saying this, but reality is a lot of vendors helped me out a lot in that situation. I had good relationships with a lot of small and medium-sized companies. Unfortunately, the larger ones couldn't move fast enough. But I called my vendors. I said, I need help now. I have small deployments of your systems. I need full deployment now. Certain vendors came out, worked with us 24/7. They took it personally. Oh, they can't get in your systems once we get on board. I like that. Right, that was very positive. So we worked with several vendors over the phone, 24 hours, patched our systems, put intrusion detection systems on board. It was kind of like a bake-off, okay? And it was great. I took full advantage of it. I got budget from the city administrator's office, and basically I had a bake-off. See who can protect me the best, and you win, right? And so it worked out very positively. I think going back, I would look at and say that the vendor relationships, the relationships with the FBI, because we were able to gather the necessary data to actually present it to the FBI and say, okay, we can open up a case. FBI decided to open up a case based on the data we gathered, which was very positive for us. And so I'll leave it at that, and I'll answer more questions as we go forward, but it was a very positive experience. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I'm glad I've been through it. There was no data loss, and I guess that's why I'm glad I've been through it.
Okay. Am I on? Okay. I wanted to make sure I didn't quite hear the echo. My name is Jeana Pieralde. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the City of San Francisco. And in 2008, we suffered what has been ranked consistently among the top 10 insider threats in the country. We had one of our network administrators decide to take over our network devices and lock us out of our core network infrastructure. What started out as a personnel action turned into, I think, probably one of the worst situations I could imagine. And I say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but when we knew what we had on our hands and we're in the war room planning the events behind what we were going to do to prior to the confrontation with Mr. Childs in July of 2008, somebody in the room said, "There's no way he will not give you the passwords." And I said, the fact that you said that means we're not going to get them. And we operated from the very beginning as though we weren't going to get them. What makes the case very difficult is there was a lot of controversy about the case at the time. It still lingers today, whether the city was right to prosecute and move forward with prosecution. But at the end of the day, the case boiled down to one employee decided that they owned, possessed, and were the proprietor of the city's network system, a system that was paid for by the city, a system that he was, as a work for hire and as an employee of the city, was his job duty to work on and implement with others who he decided to exclude. And as we went down the path of figuring out what was going on, we learned that this individual, Mr. Terry Childs, was a convicted felon that had not been disclosed. He had not disclosed that to the city. And so when we asked for the passwords to our devices and attempted to reassign him to another position, Mr. Childs said to us, I've been locked out of these systems for 3 to 4 months. I don't have the passwords. Here's some alternative passwords. I don't know what to tell you if they don't work. I'm not feeling well. I'd like an ambulance. I want to go home. That was the beginning of 13 days of the city being locked out of its core network infrastructure, a network infrastructure that served public health, the sheriff's department, the police department, the fire department, the human services agency, the controller's office, all of the city's financials were served by those network services. On July 21st, 2008, Mayor Gavin Newsom was able to get the passwords by visiting Mr. Childs in his jail cell. That was a well-reported story. That is actually really true. So people have asked me, is that actually true? Yes. I was sitting next to Mayor Newsom when he gave us the password. And the first 4 numbers in the password that Mr. Childs gave us, by the way, which was 45 characters long.
It's a strong password.
It was a very strong password. It had a lot of special characters, a lot of caps, shifts. It was really
give
a cool
props for that.
It was a great password. The first 4 characters for the password was the code to the bathroom. Just as a funny little side note. But at the end of the day, we were able to get our network back. We were able to recover the network. We discovered at several points in the course of the recovery of the network that had we not been as cautious as we had been, we could have very easily tipped the network and taken out the services because the devices were running on RAM. There was no flash memory or write back of the configurations of the network devices. And when Terry says, thank you to his vendors, I have to say the same thing. Several of our large vendors, the one that I point to the most is Cisco, came to bear very quickly. If you've ever seen Cisco's services, little army of security specialists come walking through your door, They did a tremendous job for the city of San Francisco. They were there with us in that room every day, 14 to 16 hours a day, without question. And it was because we had such a great relationship with that vendor community. By the same token, we had such a good relationship with that community that when we started to be on the radar of the anonymous folks about 6, 7 months ago, they were the ones that came in and helped us harden our systems and start to test and protect our networks so that we didn't have another incident or get some bad publicity that Oakland suffered. We were concerned that we may have already been breached. So, again, we thank that vendor community. They come in and they help, and they do so because they do take it personally. And they take it personally because it's their device protecting your network, it's their reputation protecting your systems. And so they came in and they helped us. The subsequent result of that case was we went through an 18-month trial that tore our department apart. The cost of Terry Childs was $2.45 million. The restitution awarded to the city in that case was $1.4 million. By the way, we'll see that paid back June 15th of 3439. As Mr. Childs is paying us back at $20 a week. So I just want to make that point that it's a sunk, lost cost. And Mr. Childs was convicted. He served 3 years in jail, and we held him on a $5 million bail for most of that. By the time he was actually convicted, he had served almost 2 years in jail, just short of 2 years. So it was a very serious case, and it was one that really, I think, highlighted for a lot of people the ultimate of insider threat. And even in a government agency, where you expect people to be well vetted, that these things happen. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you all for those scary stories and sharing. So I think I'll go to Jeana first with the first question. Do you feel the organization could have been better prepared to prevent or at least minimize the impact of the Terry Childs event?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. Terry Childs comes down to, and all of these incidents come down to, the people in the process. And I think in this case, we did not have, and should have had, the HR processes in place to help the manager that was managing Mr. Childs. He had a history of belligerence. He had a history of difficult with his fellow employees and his managers. He had a history of emailing threats to coworkers. And I think to have a management structure in place and an HR structure in place that allows you to deal with those and identify those individuals and start to manage them more closely starts that conversation. When you start to see inappropriate behavior from an employee, and this was over a period of 4 or 5 years, when you start to see inappropriate behavior from an employee, you need to start to manage it right away. And I think the organization could have been better prepared in having better processes and better training of its managers and of its employees as to what the expectations were. So absolutely.
So how about you, Terry, and your situation?
I would agree with what Jeana said. I mean, anytime you go through a process like this, I think you learn something. You can always say that you could have done something better, and that's always the case. Otherwise, you're not really paying attention. In our case, I wish I'd had the tools and the toys, quite frankly, that I have today. I have a lot more capability as far as procedures, policies, as well as technology to prevent something like this. I personally, I'm from the standpoint that if someone really wants to get in badly, they probably can. You just try not to attract the tough person, the one that's really good, the top hacker. I don't think we've attracted that. I hope we never do. It's like the police will tell you when your car is stolen. If a really good thief really wants it, they can take it. There's really not a lot you can do about it. And so I think right now, we were lucky in the sense that I think we had the response from the vendors as well as the technology we had in place was good enough. But I'm still striving for more. I want more. Our policies are constantly evolving. I'm waiting to see what happens now. This is October again. I think we'll probably see something happen again. I'll learn something new.
Becky, anything?
Sorry about that. I didn't want you to hear my breathing while these guys were talking. I think Department of Child Support Services and OTEC did have some lessons learned on this incident, and one of the most obvious ones is probably won't be sending tapes in the mail anymore. Despite the fact that you think that the carrier system can be relied on, there's contractual issues, blah, blah, blah. There are other alternatives nowadays to transmitting data. And in fact, OTEC had some good plans to have a direct connection between the Goldcamp data center and the Vacaville data center, which would have allowed them to transmit our CSE data to Vacaville and then have a mirroring image set up so that we could do disaster recovery there. That still is in the works, but it wasn't mature enough at the time we were doing this, or wasn't in place, I should say, at the time we were doing our disaster recovery exercise. But the one thing that we did take away from this is that we're not going to expose our data to possible loss by virtue of tapes through processing, through carrier processing any longer. Yeah.
Thank you. So if I could ask each of you, what types of changes were adopted or implemented as a result of these incidents? I think you just mentioned a few for yours.
Yeah, I sort of answered that one. Yeah, I think so.
But maybe Terry, I heard you have some tools available to you today that maybe you didn't have before.
So one of the baseline things that, and it may be surprising to folks, but I think at this point, anything that goes into our public DMZ that we didn't have before actually gets a full overview as far as its hardening as well as intrusion protection systems, something that wasn't standard before. So now I don't care what the push is, I don't care how fast it has to go out, I don't care what the push is to put it out there. It should not go out there unless it has intrusion protection systems on there. And basically, that's something that didn't take place before, quite frankly. So I feel comfortable with that. At the same time, again, our processes are more that our systems administrators are now checking the systems, checking their logs on a regular basis. Something, again, that even though we have cut staff, we have put some things behind to say, okay, this is now a priority. I know we don't really have a lot of time. Something may have to drop off the list, but this is what you now have to do. So, yes, I think we've improved our processes.
And how about you, Jeana? What do you think changed as far as maybe processes, vetting folks? Did any of that change?
Oh, yes.
Looking?
Yeah, we'll do the bullet points. So we've now added to every position that we hire for our department, you must go through the backgrounding by the San Francisco Police Department, which means you get to walk the walk through central booking at SFPD. And we figure if you survive that, more power to you. We also do a cursory check with the Sheriff's Department, and we tell people in the interviews that they're going to be vetted through law enforcement, and that if they have any open warrants, it'll be a one-way trip down to 14th Street. And you'll be, your next stop will be San Bruno. That has helped a lot. We've been able to get folks that their backgrounds are clean and they don't have any criminal histories. We have started a more stringent performance management plan. And I have to say honestly, the one thing that an incident like Terry Childs did do in the organization from a very political level is nobody wants a repeat performance. And nobody, myself included. So we now have an incident response team. We have an incident response program. We have a security program that is very well blessed through our governance council. We are on the first call for most of the organizations in the city for incident response and what to do. And we've hired our security team and hired individuals that meet a certain profile. We didn't just hire security people. We weren't looking for people. One of my experiences was in this process, and I think we kind of talked about this earlier, was one of the issues that we had in the Terry Childs case was a lot of vendor cold calls of incident responders looking for an incident. And when we interview security people, we find that a lot of them will ask us about that case in the interview. That's the quickest way to not get through to the next round. Because I don't want incident responders looking for incidents. What I want is security people that are here to help us prevent incidents, that want to fly under the radar, that when I leave and come to speaking engagements like this, or come to a panel, or do whatever I do as a CISO, that I know my staff that are attending meetings back in the city in my place are appropriate and are communicating the right message out to everybody. The other big initiative we have this year, and it's one that kind of was a thing from the Terry Childs case, is we're doing a citywide employee training program on information security. And very specific message of the city owns these computers. The city owns those cell phones. The city owns that iPad. It is ours. And we at any point in time can come take it, examine it, and look at what you've got on it. And if we ask you for the password, you will give it to us. And that has been a huge change from even when I got there 7 years ago. So that's some of the things that we've done.
So it definitely sounds like the organizations may be taking security a little more seriously today as a result of some of the incidents that have occurred. What were you most surprised to learn about your organization and its leaders during the actual incident response? Were there any surprises there that...
I'll start out by answering that. The surprise to me, I am returned to state service after a long period of time out, and my CIO role here at the Department of Child Support Services is only a little over 2 years old now. And so this incident was the opportunity for me to see the breadth of the state government's oversight in this area for purposes of information security. We started out in our assessment of how do we respond to this by looking at the state's requirements for notifications, and talked to Michele and others that kind of helped us with the context for what we're supposed to do. But even questions like notifying our customers, we have the individual child support folks whose data might have been present on this tape or was present on this tape, who we had to communicate with. We knew that, and we were crafting the message and trying to make it simple and clear and timely. And we also had the local child support agencies, because the department works with 58 county local child support agencies that have these individuals who were affected as their customers, and they knew those folks would be coming to them. We had the federal government as well as all of our agency folks. So timing the communications, making sure that everybody was properly consulted, being appropriately aware of the potential liability that the state might face as a virtue of if this information actually did result in harm to individuals, lost information to harm to individuals. So there were an extensive amount of coordinating activities that had to be done, properly messaged and consistently messaged. You can't tell your agency folks one thing, tell the end customer another thing, and oh, by the way, here comes the press. They want to know about it, and you've got to be consistent in what you're saying. And you have to control the timeliness of saying, because you can't let the broader world know before your agency leadership knows. So there's a lot of complexity at the very early stages of how to respond and handle these situations that I think departments are well served if they sort of have this clarity before it happens. Because if you're scrambling to do it right at the time you have to do it, you're going to find that either you'll miss something or the pressure will be really onerous. So that was eye-opening to me, because I hadn't been through it with the state before. Although I will say that everywhere we turned, to the California Technology Agency, to our agency folks, you know, even up and through the governor's office that needed to be apprised and review the information that was going to be made available to the public. Timely, responsive, really very well prepared themselves to serve the need well of this thing. So that was eye-opening. There's a lot of them, but they actually operated very efficiently and very effectively and supportive, and that was pretty cool.
I would briefly say that with the City of Oakland, the city administration was very, very quick acting, quick responding. Basically, government is not known to move fast. And so once this event happened, we needed a certain amount of funds to actually protect ourselves. And that was the fastest I've ever seen dollars approved for any project. I've been with the City of Oakland for 11 years, and there was no politics, there was no why. Every signature that was needed was provided instantly. I was given funds, take the steps you feel necessary to protect the City of Oakland. That was great. I've never had a response like that. Every project has politics. This did not. The politics were outside. Inside of the City of Oakland, there were no politics. At that point, get the job done. So I was very pleased with that. I was also pleased with the FBI. Once the FBI got involved, I provided them the information regarding this little database. I said, fine, you have enough information for us to be able to file a case. Thank you very much. You did a great job with that. Great support. I said, by the way, do you have services that can come in and look at this server? Because even though that's all that happened, I wanted to find out, was there more? Was that just the tip of the iceberg? Was there more involved in this? And they said, fine. They sent out a team, non-intrusively, copied the server, took that data back to their labs, came back with a report, nothing at all, nothing done. That was very positive, so I was very happy with that response.
Trying to figure out how to answer this one. So our leadership, our immediate departmental leadership was technology leadership, understood the problem. I think for us, the issue was really the communication out in the public space. We had a lot of leaks. We were like a leaky ship, right, going down the causeway. And so for our leadership, it was hard to contain and craft a cohesive message because of all the information coming from other employees out to the press. That was problematic for us. But one thing we did learn was, again, the politics fell by the wayside. We were able, again, moving faster than the speed of government, we were able to get money, large amounts of it to spend and to get this thing contained and put back the right way. I think where it became a little bit problematic for us was once the individual was in custody and once we had control of our networks back, there was a disconnect politically in perception that the incident was over and we could go back to normal operating procedures. And so that took a little bit of education and work through to communicate that to the higher levels that wasn't the case and that we needed to take this as a lesson learned and move forward and have a more structured security program. But you know, I think our leadership responded very, very well to this. There wasn't a lot of politics. There was, what do you need? Let's get it done. Let's move forward.
Good to hear. So a couple of you brought up the issue of cost, and we're hearing and reading about Alaska, who had a 2007, I believe it was, data breach, lost thumb drive containing about 500 individuals' information. And now, just recently, the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level has levied a $1.7 million fine against them for HIPAA violation, for not having encrypted that on the front end or properly protected it. So do you feel that in your incident that the cost of preventative measures, had they been taken before the incident, been less than the cost of incident response and then corrective action on the back end?
I'll answer that first. I think in our case, the answer would be yes, but I think it was minimal because the bottom line, these systems should have been in place at day one. So they would have to be paid for at some point in time. So we pay for them now instead of in the past. So that cost doesn't change. I think the cost that we had to endure was the cost of basically, you know, bringing systems down, having staff work overtime to patch systems that should have been patched already. I think that was our biggest cost. But otherwise, I'll just answer that question briefly, that for us, it was, since there was no major loss, we were able to leverage state, federal resources. I can say that it was an extensive cost more than doing it beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Well, for us, I think we were lucky because we didn't get fined by anybody, so that was good, at least not yet. The major cost of the incident really was the time all of these groups of staff had to take to assess and to react to and respond to in a supportive way. And then the notification process, sending out something in the neighborhood of 900,000 contact letters was postage, and then processing from Office of State Printers. So that cost wasn't insurmountable, but I think more important than the actual cost that we experienced is the potential loss of trust and confidence that the community would have if they didn't feel that our department was doing everything possible to safeguard people's information. And so in that respect, I think it puts the question of how much should you spend to prevent things from going sideways, breaches, security incidents, or whatever. I think in today's world, the cost-benefit or the risk avoidance quotient is much more in favor of doing everything you can to prevent the loss of data or to prevent intrusion into your systems. And I don't think that was the case years ago. And I think even though our system is a more modern system, I think it has a lot of safeguards baked into it in the normal use of it. This information security, this disaster recovery exercise wasn't viewed as part of the fundamental architecture itself, and in retrospect, it probably should have been. And so now I think, as I said, departments working with OTEC to integrate a solution that is part of a cohesive, secure architecture. But it's something you do have to weigh, particularly in in times where budgets are tight. It's hard to do that kind of investment, but the cost of the loss of data or the cost of an intrusion is almost incalculable in addition to fines and your hard cost. It's significant, yeah.
Yes, it would have been cheaper, significantly. We ran the numbers just for our own education one time, and we found that had we put those measures and proactive measures in place, again, the people, the process, and the technology to handle this before the event happened, we would have spent about 30% of what we spent. So we would have spent probably $600,000 versus $2.5 million. That's a lot of money.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So we have time for one more question, then maybe we'll open it up to a few audience questions. So what are the top 2 or 3 things you can share with your peers here, your CIOs, ISOs, and possibly some business leaders in the audience, learned from the experience that you'd like to leave them with? I would advise everybody to take the lesson learned that I learned from having the incident and maybe prepare a little bit in terms of what would you do if. Like we do disaster recovery kinds of exercises, perhaps we ought to incorporate an incident or a breach recovery exercise as part of what we do on an annual or biannual basis, just to make sure that all the people that are going to be involved with it are clear on roles and responsibilities, have a good project plan, that you know who you've got to notify, and be prepared to assess. That's an important part, to assess the level and the consequences of a particular problem so that you know the right path to take. And make sure you're, on the business side, your executives are part of that planning exercise. I was very lucky because in my organization, my director and my chief deputy were very responsive, very supportive of what we had to do. The operations folks that handle call center activities, they stepped up. Our mailroom stepped up. Everybody that had to play a role in handling the size of the communication and the responsiveness to customers had to step up, and so they did so in an emergency kind of situation. But it would be, I think they would all tell me in retrospect, it would have been nice if we had planned a little bit ahead of time to do this kind of thing. So yeah, I think just sort of make folks aware on a drill kind of a basis once every 2 years perhaps, just to keep people familiar and fresh with the kinds of thinking and actions that have to take place if this occurs. Very good.
I would say basically, based on our experience with the Occupy Oakland incident, Anonymous, I would say basically, if you can find out who your contacts are, state and local and federal, who your contacts are. If you have a breach or something happens, who are you going to call? Right? So right now, based on that incident, I'm getting calls on a regular basis. Anytime there's a threat to any city in California that's any way associated with Oakland, I'll get a call from the FBI saying it may not affect you guys, but basically you need to be aware of this. And so I'm getting that call directly. I wish I had that beforehand. Those relationships are very good. They have tools and systems in place that you just don't have. They're a resource. They're an extra set of eyes and ears on what's going on around your environment. So for us, anytime there's a protest, anything that remotely looks like a challenge, we get that call. So I'm glad to have that resource. I wish I had known that in advance. What vendors would you call? For me, I had a long wish list. City of Oakland didn't have a great budget over the last couple of years. So I had a long wish list. So the minute I got budget, I knew exactly who I was going to call. Mm-hmm. And that helped a lot. I got folks in who I knew would respond, would put systems in before I ever gave them a PO. I had 30 servers protected over a week's time with overtime, 24 hours assistance with no PO. Never had that happen before. So that was very, very supportive for me, very helpful. So I'd say basically know who you're going to be dealing with when you need help.
I think that Becky and Terry both make a good point. In both cases, those are very valuable things to have. The other thing I would add to that is have a public communications plan in place. It's one thing for us to come sit up here and talk to you folks, peer to peer, but one of the things we found is the media generally didn't understand the technology we were talking about. The PIO that we had to put, the public relations folks that we had to put in front of the press didn't necessarily understand the technology they were talking about. So having a good public communications plan and educating those folks that are going to be in front of the press is a good thing. Putting me in front of the press, maybe not such a great idea. Just saying. But having a good communications plan, knowing who your vendors are, gaming out your possible scenarios of breach. And the other thing I would add to that, the one thing that we did experience was a little bit of what I call Ricky Rescue Syndrome. And that's where people thought because law enforcement told them to do something, it was a good idea to do it. Pre-train your staff to respond to breaches so that they know their role, they know their place. We had folks trying to hand stuff over to law enforcement that they had no business handing over to law enforcement without a warrant or without a subpoena. So, that kind of training and preparedness really will help you.
Excellent, thank you. So we have, we're short on time, but let's try one or two questions. Do we have mics? Someone doing the mics for the audience? Did I lose a runner?
This question is actually for San Francisco. For part of your mitigating strategies, are you now currently doing performance reviews for your employees?
Yes, and we're doing them annually. And I actually, for my team, you get a mid-year. But we're doing performance reviews. We are also doing, we are right now in the process of implementing a privileged user management program and system so that our administrators and users understand and we can get in the back door if we need to.
And your HR department understands the importance of that?
Yes, very much so. And we actually had that plan before, but it was applied based on what the managers chose to do or not to do, and now it's consistent. It's part of my performance review to get them done as well.
I actually have another question for the entire panel, too. How many of you are utilizing ICS as far as your training to respond to incidents?
FEMA? You talking about the FEMA Incident Command System?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a requirement for our department that everybody goes through it.
How about the other two?
Same here. We go through the same training.
I haven't gone through that training.
Okay. We can talk later.
Okay.
I believe somebody down here had a question.
I think,
yeah.
Yeah, let's do Denise's and then we'll wrap up.
This is probably mostly for San Francisco, but Well, only because
There's other people here.
Only because it doesn't so closely fit their
Yeah.
circumstances. But I heard you were the one that said yes to, had we spent the money beforehand, it would have been quite a bit less money.
Yes.
So do you have any advice for those out here about how to convince your leadership to invest in that infrastructure so that you don't have to spend so much money after the fact? So in other words, you buy the insurance policy in advance instead of trying to buy it after the event.
So I'm gonna put this kind of and I think Terry could probably add to this a little bit, because he had his wish list as well. We all have our wish list of technologies. We all want to be the coolest and the most advanced, and I'm going to tell you right now, and I love my vendor community, so I don't want to upset anybody. But at the end of the day, your most effective tools are training your people, and a good online training program. Like we have 23,000 employees, a good online training program, a good policy program, developing organizational maturity, spending the monies to develop that organizational maturity and governance so that when you bring these technologies in, you can absorb them and you can use them effectively and properly. You can put all the technology in place, but if you don't have the good people, process, and governance to manage that, it's going to be all for naught. So if you're starting from scratch, focus on the people and the process first. The technologies will come in as you need them.
And I would just briefly add that I would say point to us. I mean, basically, we're examples of what can happen, right? As long as it never happens, they won't spend money on it. So let's use us as examples and go from there. That's shot.
There's lots of headlines out there. You can just...
Yeah. And I believe, and we're public employees, so it's easy to get our email, contact information. You can easily find us if you call San Francisco. They'll route you to our department. We're happy, I think most of us, to share and talk to your senior management and try to help them understand and educate them as to what our experience was.
And I'll just plug next year or sooner, the next event we have where you could bring your business leaders to hear this type of information. I encourage you to do that. So I want to thank our panel once again, our brave souls, for being up here today and sharing their lessons learned with us. Please, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.